going on, everybody? It's your buddy, it's your pal Spaz Phoenix, the YWC Reality Check. And tonight, today, this morning, this afternoon, whenever you're reading this, we're just going to have a little chat. This is going to be the first thing in a while that's going to fall into the category of off the cuff, because off the cuff was supposed to be always supposed to be the catch-all if I just had a random topic to come up in here and talk to you about. And I haven't used that playlist, that hashtag on YouTube in a long time. But nothing too heavy-handed, nothing too political, nothing too controversial, just a gathering of rumors and a gathering of little news bits and clips and all those sorts of things having to do with WWE and the changing landscape of their pay-per-views in the new Papa H era. Now, I want to be clear. I want to be really, really clear that this is by no means a news video, because I'm not here to break news. You guys know that's never really been my thing. We'll talk about news when it comes out occasionally, but this is not a news channel by any stretch of the imagination. I'm going to say, first and foremost, you want your news, go over to What Culture, because What Culture will have already grabbed it from everywhere else you need to grab it from. And if you want more in-depth commentary type stuff, I would say go to Good Mic Work. This is just going to be me throwing my opinions at the wall and seeing what sticks. But before we go on, I do want to say, because I haven't done it in a while, if you are listening to me on YouTube right now, if you want to find me somewhere else, go to my YouTube alternative, which is Rumble. Go to Rumble, search Spaz Phoenix Podcast. If you don't want to do that, if you want to find me in an audio platform, go to, what is it? It's not iTunes anymore. It's Apple Podcasts. Go to Spotify, Anchor, iHeartRadio, all those places. Search Spaz Phoenix Podcast. If you want to find me on Twitter, Spaz Phoenix, or Spaz Phoenix with a 1 at the end. On Instagram, at Spaz Phoenix. Or you can go to Facebook and find the Spaz Phoenix Podcast Facebook group. I would love to see some more activity over there, because there isn't any, and that's why I don't really put anything over there right now. What I want to say before we get into any of this is, what do you guys think of the current WWE schedule? Now, it becomes a more complicated conversation because there's more options now. There's more, I mean, there's always been more options, but there's more mainstream North American options now than there have been in a while. I mean, I know MLW is kicking off on YouTube and all that sort of thing. I won't pretend to know what's going on over there. But Impact is a thing. You guys know I've been very in and out with my coverage of Impact. There's AEW, obviously 4 times a year, plus all the elevated episodes that they do. There's AEW's version of ROH that's also kicking off. There's NXT, which we'll talk about later. But WWE gives us at least something a month. So the idea that you go through the entire year and you can get pay-per-view fatigue, pay-per-view wrestling exhaustion, for lack of a better term, is very, very much a thing. But I'm going to try and ask you guys for your opinions on this particular pod. Like I say, throw them out on Twitter, or if you're listening to me on something that has a comment section, like YouTube, like Rumble, etc., throw it down in the comment section. Sort of put everything else to one side. Let me know what you guys think of the current sort of WWE pay-per-view schedule / premium live event. I'll do the Simon Miller wavy hands, even though you can't see it. Let me know what you think of their schedule. If you want to include NXT in that, you can include NXT in that, or not. Do you like it the way it is? Do you think there's positives right now? What are the negatives right now? What would you change if it was up to you, if you wanted to make a recommendation to Papa H? Would it be just more pay-per-views? Would it be less pay-per-views? Would it be, hey, eliminate this thing, eliminate that thing? Would it be making them all back on Sundays again? We don't know. I still don't know, I'm not going to lie, how I feel about the gradual move of pay-per-view in general to Saturdays, because we just had Crown Jewel. We just had Crown Jewel yesterday, as I'm taping this on... taping this? How fucking old am I? As I'm recording this on Sunday night, Crown Jewel was yesterday, and that was not only a Saturday pay-per-view, but it was a midday pay-per-view, which takes you to Sunday, and you're like, it's a pay-per-view weekend, but like, isn't there, the pay-per-view weekend is supposed to be here? Is it something as simple as, you know, keep the pay-per-views on Sunday or not? Do you want less? Do you want more? I haven't heard very many people from the camp of wanting more pay-per-views. Do you want every other month? Do you want to get rid of certain types of pay-per-views? Yes, we all want to get rid of the Saudi Arabia shows. Can we keep the politics out of the comment section? That would be great. I'm just talking about the show for the show's sake. I want to hear everything. Before you even listen to anything that I have to say, give me all your thoughts down in the box below. What do you think they should do? As we tick over into 2023, which is not that far away, which is kind of terrifying. But, yeah, I guess you could say from... I don't want to say from SummerSlam, because SummerSlam was still sort of half a Vince project and half a Triple H project. So we've had Clash at the Castle, which was a sort of a unique pay-per-view experience. We had Extreme Rules, which was the first sort of, I guess you could say, normal pay-per-view under Triple H. We just had Crown Jewel. We're about to have Survivor Series with the War Games concept being involved. I don't know, put it down in the box below. How do you think he's doing so far? Has there been a change? Have you felt a change? Put it down in the box below as well. But as I talk about ticking over into 2023, I should really talk about New Year's Day, or Day 1. And the first bit of news I want to talk about is the fact that the Day 1 pay-per-view was canceled, removed from the schedule, and there's no December pay-per-view, period. Now, that was the piece of news that we got initially. Day 1, on January 1st, when it came out last year, I think the idea was, instead of having a December pay-per-view, we kick off the year with something a bit fun, a bit frivolous, and then we had, you know, stuff happened, and we had to change the main event, and whatever the case may be. But I could see the value of them just doing something that was sort of throwaway to kick off the year, because everything from Royal Rumble onwards is more serious. Like, I could say, like, if you want to call an A pay-per-view and a B pay-per-view, Day 1 could sort of be considered a C pay-per-view. It was something for fun. It was something not that integral initially. It was something you could skip if you wanted to. If you were tired from your celebrating the night before, you could flick it on. It was nameless, brainless entertainment, but I could see the value in it. Now, this news, since it broke, is technically not true anymore, depending on how you want to look at it, because NXT is giving us Deadline. But I know most people aren't watching NXT. That's fine. I'm hoping that it gets better with the black and gold and white era, or the 3-point gold era. So I'm going to be watching Deadline. I don't know what they're going to put on that card, because it looks kind of crazy at the moment. But what I could say, I am all for this idea of going from Survivor Series, which is going to have the War Games, which we're going to talk about later, and having a big, long gap between there and Royal Rumble. Because if you've got all that time, there is no reason why you can't build. I mean, the Royal Rumble's 30 people, right? Men's Rumble, Women's Rumble. 30 people each. There's no reason you can't put all your work into your mid-card. Let your champions just sort of hang out there and be champions. Work on your mid-card so that by the time you get to the Royal Rumble, there's at least a good 10 believable winners of the Rumble. Not, oh, well, John Cena's in the Rumble, so what 29 people is he going to beat? That could be great. But there's a thing right now. And it started with again, I'm trying to avoid the political element of this. When they started doing the super shows and the Crown Jewel shows, they did the one in Australia, they did the one, they did all the ones they've done in Saudi Arabia, and they did one other one that I can't remember the name of. But before the Saudi shows started actually becoming legitimate parts of the calendar, they were just big, dumb fun shows. You know, we're going to bring this legend back or that legend back, or we're going to do this really stupid gimmick thing for a night. We're going to bring back DX, and Shawn Michaels is going to have no hair, and it's going to be very sad, and all that kind of thing. It was completely disposable. Now, it was completely disposable mostly because people don't want to talk about the Saudi Arabia thing, which is fine. But you can create a more or less disposable card for December just to put a fine point on things, just to sort of put a cap on a couple of more minor storylines that you don't intend on carrying over into the new year, because you carry over the major ones. Obviously, you're going to carry over Judgment Day, you're going to carry over the Bloodline, you're going to carry over the continuously growing women's division, which most people are shitting on, and that's fine. You can go sit in the corner and be wrong. But there's some things that you could not. Like, you could decide, for an example, this whole idea that JBL is now managing Baron Corbin has brought Baron Corbin to Raw for this new start. If you wanted to put a halt to that because you realize not anybody's liking it because it rings a little too true for some people, you could have, hey man, if I beat you at, you know, WWE end of the year, or whatever you want to call it. Or what was it? Back in the day they called it Armageddon, didn't they? If I beat you at Armageddon, then JBL's no longer allowed to be your manager, and you'll be kicked back to SmackDown. And, like, you could put a really stupid pay-per-view together as a way of capping off all the storylines that you don't want to carry over into the new year, and it would serve a purpose, not necessarily in the most spectacular fashion, but it would say, here's what we're stopping, here's what we're keeping. Bloodline's going to keep going. Obviously, Cody Rhodes is going to come back, Sami Zayn's going to do something, you know, CM Punk shows up at the Royal Rumble, who knows? But focus on all the good shit that's going to go forward and all the you know, the stuff that's not hitting, the stuff that doesn't, you know, stick to the wall when you throw it, can all be wrapped up in that pay-per-view. Or the idea of having the big, huge gap to build everybody towards the Rumble is also a cool way to go. As I say, because there's no pay-per-view in December, sticking in one more NXT show, even though we don't know what it's going to look like and it could be a bit scattered, it might be the way to go. Let me know what you guys think down in the box below. Do you think we need a December pay-per-view? Do you think we could, if it had gone off properly, do you think day one could have been a new thing that they could have started that would have served the similar purposes that I'm talking about? Or are you guys happy, if you are watching NXT, are you happy for NXT just to have a month where they are the only show? That could be a thing as well. Overall, the idea that we're going to get less gimmick pay-per-views and more international shows. Yes, gimmick pay-per-views can go the way of the donkey. Some of them. Some of them. Let's not forget that the Royal Rumble is a gimmick pay-per-view. And nobody that says, let's get rid of gimmick pay-per-views is advocating for getting rid of the Royal Rumble, because the Royal Rumble is something that we have accepted. And there's one other pay-per-view that I think we can leave that's kind of like that we're going to talk about in a second. More international shows, awesome. What's happening with the Saudi Arabia shows, with the show in the UK, I think they did one, what was it? Was it Beast in the East? They serve a lot of masters by doing these international shows, because you're serving audiences that hardly ever get a pay-per-view. So as we see in Saudi Arabia, as we saw in Wales, as we saw at Beast in the East back in the day, as we saw in Australia in that big dome building that they filled, they can go there and easily fill a fucking stadium. And why does that matter to me? I'm not in the audience. I'm sitting in my room watching it on my TV. The crowd matters. If the COVID era, if the Thunderdome Performance Center CWC era taught us anything, the crowd fucking matters. If you're not going to do the show in my backyard, do it somewhere where you can fill a stadium. If you're not going to bring it to Toronto, if you're not going to bring it to Skydome or Rogers Centre or Scotiabank Arena or whatever the case may be, and still charge me less for that pay-per-view than AEW is going to charge me for a ticket to Rampage, then take it somewhere in the world where A, the crowd isn't as spoiled, that they are more appreciative, and that the crowd is fucking huge. Do it. Just do it. If it's not going to be in my backyard, put it in the biggest stadium possible so that I can have that radiate from the screens. Like I say, political stuff aside, the Saudi Arabia shows always feel big. The show in Australia felt big. Beast in the East felt big. The Clash at the Castle show felt big. Do more international shows? Absolutely. Go to the places in the world where we know they treat pro wrestling more like a real thing. I know the key example most people use is Japan. I'm not going to lean on that because I don't know enough about Japanese wrestling culture, and it would be really, really ignorant for me to try. But there are places in the world that treat pro wrestling more like a real thing, where the results of the pro wrestling show that happened the night before show up in the newspaper the next day. Find those places, cultivate those places, go to those places where there's never been a pay-per-view ever, and get the crowd. Get the crowd. You know, people are saying, because, you know, political correctness is what it is, everybody has to cheer Bianca Belair. But guess what? They went to Saudi. They went to Wales. They come to Canada. I'll tell you that one for free. Bayley cheered out of the building. Listen to the crowd. Listen to the chants of the crowd at the Saudi press conference. Listen to the chants of the crowd at Cardiff, Wales. Listen to any show, and I will say personally because I'm there, listen to any crowd that's coming out of Toronto. They tried to put her face-to-face in the ring with Trish fucking Stratus last time they did Monday Night Raw in Toronto, and Bayley still got cheered. So you need to get a reaction, and this is not a dig at my American friends. Please don't get me wrong. I know a lot of you. I interact with a lot of you online. A lot of you co-host shows with me. Shout out to Jordan and Kristen and Jake DeMarco and all them. And you're all awesome people. But get a different crowd opinion than just one place. I will be the first one to say, you know, WWE is an American company. Of course they perform mostly in America. Of course WrestleMania is going to start with the American national anthem because they're an American company in America. I have no problem with that whatsoever, and if you do, you're kind of a weird person. But go other places to get other reactions, because not only are they louder, because absence makes the heart grow fonder, the reactions might be a little bit different. You might get a different fan's opinion. Oh yes. Less gimmick pay-per-views, obviously. You don't want to have, with the exception of the Royal Rumble, and one other thing I'm going to talk about in a second, you don't want to have, hey, we need to escalate this to a super violent stipulation just because it's March, for example. Now, that's a horrible example because WrestleMania used to be in March, but it is what it is. The exception to that, I mean, the prime example is Hell in the Cell. I'm going to sort of merge these points together as I'm looking at them on my clipboard in my really, really shitty writing. I'm going to merge this with the announcement that sort of confirmed that the Hell in the Cell pay-per-view was canceled. That is the prime example. They have neutered the concept of Hell in a Cell. They made it red, which doesn't help anything. They do more than one in a year. They made a pay-per-view around it where, as I say, they have to do stuff with it where it's just, hey, you guys are having your first match ever, and it's going to be in a Hell in the Cell match because it's July or whenever Hell in the Cell is. That shouldn't be a thing, should it? They did it. This is what I'm going to say too, because I'm a really big fan of Bray Wyatt, and so I really hate to even bring this up. They did it in the Rollins-Wyatt match, and what I firmly believe, and this is where I both agree and disagree with other people, is they made the Hell in the Cell itself so commonplace, you had to do so much else in it to make it stick out. And that's where you get all that ridiculousness from the Rollins-Wyatt thing, where they literally killed the gimmick. You know, they always talk about, back in the old days, talk about killing the towns. They killed the gimmick. They had to rehab Seth Rollins after that. They had to rehab Bray Wyatt after that, and they've done a piss-poor job of rehabbing the gimmick itself. So what I will say, build yourself a blood feud. And when I say a blood feud, I mean a feud where you think people might actually get bloody. Get rid of the red cell because it's ridiculous. And keep it away for a long-ass time. And have two guys blowing something off on a big four. Where you think the rest of the card isn't, you know, up to snuff for what that big four should be, like a SummerSlam. Every other big four, like WrestleMania is WrestleMania, the Rumble's the Rumble, Survivor Series is Survivor Series, we'll talk about Survivor Series later. SummerSlam is the only real big four pay-per-view where your distinction of what it actually is can kind of vary. So if you've got a SummerSlam card that doesn't look like the rest of the card is, you know, worthy of the name SummerSlam or worthy of being one of the big four pay-per-views, then, yeah, you build up a blood feud in your main event, and then you bring back Hell in the Cell, and then it's good, because, as I say once again, absence makes the heart grow fonder. You're not just expecting it because it's April, and you bring back the proper cell, and you make it worth it. Now, the other side of the coin, the other side of the gimmick conversation is Elimination Chamber. And the reason I say that is ever since WWE sort of became two WWEs, where we had two champions and two women's champions and two tag champions and all that, Elimination Chamber has been as much a part of the road to WrestleMania as the Royal Rumble is. And as I say, we accept the Royal Rumble. Nobody that says get rid of gimmick pay-per-views is saying get rid of the Royal Rumble. And I think Elimination Chamber was on its way to that. And the problem we have now with it is you had to establish the challenger for one championship in the Rumble, and you established the challenger for the other championship in the Chamber. So, what I'm saying now is you can still have that mentality. You can have the challenger established in the Rumble and have the last challenge for the champion be at the Chamber. So obviously whoever wins the Rumble, be it Cody Rhodes, be it CM Punk, be it, you know, whoever it's going to be one of those two, I'm pretty sure. But have one more glittering, shiny moment for the champion in the Elimination Chamber as we go towards WrestleMania. Now, what's happening with the Elimination Chamber has changed over time, and it's one of these things. I'm going to say the same thing about Survivor Series later. It was the Elimination Chamber. It was, you know, it was introduced at Survivor Series, I believe. Again, more on that later. And then it became its own pay-per-view, and then it got its place in the road to WrestleMania. So it becoming the February pay-per-view and then becoming such a building block of WrestleMania was always cool. And then it happened in Saudi Arabia. And that became the Saudi Arabia show that happened in February. Now, that's fine, I guess, because I guess this part of the Saudi Arabia deal was they wanted something that was important, so you weren't going to give them the Rumble. I mean, we gave them the biggest Royal Rumble with the 50-man, Braun Strowman winning the ugly green belt and whatever, but they're not going to give them the proper Rumble, so they gave them the Elimination Chamber, I believe, personally, as sort of a compromise. So we thought that was going to be the thing, like, that was going to be the part of the WrestleMania season that happens over there. And why are we beeping? Why is this a thing? There we go. Getting Twitter notifications about the Destiny show I'm going to in a couple of weeks. That's awesome. Destiny's really good. If you're in the GTA, go check out the Destiny show. Aiden Prince is defending his title for the first time, and we're going to see Warhorse. Hey! Cheap plug for Destiny in the middle of my WWE podcast. That's always a good thing. But there was a couple different things. Apparently, it was going to be the Saudi portion of the Road to WrestleMania, which was a thing, and then we heard that they were going to get rid of it, like they were getting rid of Hell in the Cell. It was going to be, they were going to bring back No Way Out, and it was going to be the February pay-per-view, and it was still going to have the Elimination Chamber in it. It was still going to serve the same purpose. It was just going to be called No Way Out, which I thought was kind of lame. And then once again, the rumor went back to, oh, it's going to be the Saudi show. It's going to be No Way Out in Saudi, and it's still going to be the Elimination Chamber. And then they announced that next year's Elimination Chamber is going to be in Montreal. So, right country, wrong province. I don't know what they're doing with the Elimination Chamber now. I like it. As far as the gimmick pay-per-views go, Elimination Chamber can stay. Not gonna lie. Money in the Bank. Another bone of contention for a lot of people. We made Money in the Bank its own pay-per-view. We like Money in the Bank. We just don't want Money in the Bank to be Money in the Bank, which is very, very odd. Now, the rumor is it's not going to have its own pay-per-view anymore, and it's going to move back to WrestleMania, which I'm not against. I mean, the whole concept of Money in the Bank was a WrestleMania concept at first. I think it was Chris Jericho that came up with it. Hang something up there and you get a title shot later on, and then he never won it, didn't he? Has he ever complained about that? Gee, I wonder. But the idea that it's going to be at WrestleMania is kind of interesting, and of course you can only make that suggestion now because there's 2 nights. Because I'm sorry, as soon as you do Money in the Bank at WrestleMania, the counterpoint is going to be, well, you better have a women's one too. Or if you do just a women's one, that's an obvious ploy to please those exact same people. So you have to have 2. So they had to have WrestleMania go back to 2 nights for this to happen, I think. Personal opinion, I don't think you could do 2 ladder matches back to back because obviously one of them is going to be... One of them's going to suffer. One of them's going to suffer the comparison. One of them's going to be the original, and one of them's going to suffer. It's like when you put out a new cough syrup and you get the original and then you get the cherry. Well, the cherry still tastes like shit, but the original was the original. I think that by putting it over the 2 nights that they think they're going to erase that, but you're still going to have that element of one came first. So if the men's Money in the Bank is on night 1, then you have all the anticipation of, oh my god, we haven't seen a Money in the Bank ladder match since last year. And then if the ladies' one is on night 2, people are going to be like, oh, we haven't seen a Money in the Bank match since yesterday. And then we'll be less excited about the second one, and then Twitter will do what Twitter does. Now, I like it. I think it deserves to happen at WrestleMania. Now, we've done the whole somebody cashes in at WrestleMania. We've done the whole somebody wins the briefcase at Money in the Bank and cashes it in the same night. I'm really interested to see how long they're going to hold off from doing the double whammy of somebody wins the Money in the Bank in the opener of WrestleMania and cashes it in to close. I really think if they're doing this, they're going to do that. Or if the winner of the men's Money in the Bank happens on Saturday, they cash in on Sunday, because I'm sorry, the Sunday night last match is the main event. Oh, but there's a middle main event, it's the main event of night 1, then it's not the main event. The main event is the last match of WrestleMania. So when we get to next year, when it's 2023, the last match on the WrestleMania 2023 card is the main event. Just saying. For all the Sasha and Bianca Belair fans out there. Anyways, I think this could be good. I think a spectacle like this, something as popular as this, being in front of a crowd that size, not only a crowd that size, going back to what I was saying earlier about stadiums, but there's a different atmosphere at WrestleMania. Everybody kind of comes into WrestleMania wanting it to be good. Like, and I know that sounds so ridiculous and so redundant, but there's other pay-per-views where you can come in and you know people are there to boo. You know people are there to steal the show, hijack the show, whatever the case may be. The Raw after WrestleMania is very much like that. But I made this comparison a long time ago when I did my NXT Rewind series, when you see the early days of NXT, and you can definitely see in the crowd that the people are coming there with the intent to enjoy the show. You fill an arena with the people that are there with the intent to enjoy the show. You put something as popular as the Money in the Bank concept, put the right stars in the match, obviously, and I think that's a recipe for success. And I think if you do it twice over 2 nights, as I say, the second one's going to fall off in enthusiasm. You can't help but have that, but it is what it is. Now, what I've heard as well is a similar concept for the Royal Rumble. This is very... You're walking a tightrope if you do this. If you have a Saturday and a Sunday Royal Rumble, one capped off by the Men's Rumble, one capped off by the Women's Rumble, it's very tricky because there's a lot of logistics you have to bring into play. You have to build 2 entire cards around the Royal. Now, the Royal Rumble is always a really cool thing for them booking-wise because the Royal Rumble takes up an hour. Now it takes up 2 because we let the ladies in. So you really only have to put in like 1 or 2 other matches, and they've sort of benefited from that because they've been able to have singular focus. If you have a Men's Rumble on one night, a Women's Rumble on the other night, that means you have to build 2 more cards around them. Now, logic would dictate, because you don't want to exhaust wrestlers if you don't have to exhaust wrestlers, that the night that you do the Women's Rumble is the night that you stuff with men's matches, and vice versa. The night that you have the Men's Rumble, you stuff it with women's matches, because you don't want to double use wrestlers. You don't want to have, you know, some great... say for example, think about how great the New Day versus the Usos are. You don't want to have them do another one of their 25-minute classics, which they can definitely do because they're awesome, and we love the New Day and the Usos for that. But then to go back and then have to come back out for the Rumble itself and try to do anything productive there, especially with what people expect of a guy like Kofi Kingston in the Rumble after his fumble last year, which was not his fault. It could happen to anybody. If you're going to split off these things, you want to book in a way that avoids stuff like that. If you want to have a dude's card and it's capped off by the Women's Rumble, that's kind of cool. And vice versa. You want to have an entire Rumble undercard dedicated to the women, so that you could have, at the very least, a Raw Women's Championship, a SmackDown Women's Championship match, maybe an exhibition match for the NXT Women's Champion, depending on who it is at the time. Maybe have, maybe feature the NXT Women's Tag Champions, currently still held by Katana Chance and Kaden Carter. You know, the Women's Tag Team Championships went back to Damage Control at Crown Jewel. Maybe give them a chance to defend those titles as well. There's less titles to consider in the women's division, obviously, so maybe put 1 or 2 matches on there that aren't title matches, just to get more people more focused that they wouldn't typically get. There's a lot of potential in splitting the Rumble, but I still don't think you necessarily need to do it. A couple of matches in between a Men's Rumble and a Women's Rumble on a single night is fine. This is the one, Royal Rumble, because there's 2 Rumbles in it now, is the one pay-per-view now, even more than WrestleMania, that you can forgive for running long, because you've got 2 one-hour matches on it. So this is another one where I want you guys to really tell me what you think of it, because this is one that I'm not quite sure about yet. So would you guys split the Rumble? Would you guys split the Rumble if it meant more focus on everybody? If it meant that every other title got represented and nobody was being double used and nobody was being exhausted, and we can sort of flip-flop who's on what card and on what night, etc., etc. Would you guys do it, or would you keep it the way it is now and just expect that the Royal Rumble is going to be a bit long? Now, there's no real news about the Survivor Series other than the fact that Triple H is doing the War Games this year, which is fucking awesome. Triple H has just brought NXT to the main roster and let the new NXT be whatever it is. Now, Survivor Series is the one that always gets short shift when we talk about the Big Four. People are always like, oh, you know, the Survivor Series gimmick is getting really stale. I don't know how you can say that the Survivor Series gimmick is getting really stale, though this is, again, just my opinion. I'm not out here to judge anybody else. If you think something comes off as stale, then to you it's obviously come off as stale. But what Survivor Series has changed so many times over the years that I don't know how it got stale. Remember back in the day when you had the classic 4-on-4 matches, and they were all sort of undercard matches for the most part. Because mostly, the 4-on-4 matches were just these two tag teams versus these two tag teams. It was basically an extension of tag team wrestling, which is what multi-man matches should be. Anyways, but you had the 4-on-4 matches, and then when they wanted them to be bigger spectacles, when they wanted them to, you know, if 4 is good, 5 must be better, like that type of escalation, you had the 5-on-5s, which made it a very different thing. It wasn't two teams, you know, teaming up for a common good. It was a lot of the time one person versus one person, and they were building their respective teams. Or in one particular case that I absolutely loved, when it was two guys building a team around them to go against each other. And of course, with that, I'm talking about Team Captains DX versus Team Captains Rated RKO. Because I'm sorry, I know it's not popular to say this because people like shitting on all these guys these days. The best Survivor Series team ever assembled was Triple H, Shawn Michaels, the Hardys, and CM Punk. When Shawn Michaels super kicked Mike Knox and turned around and asked the referee, hey, was that guy in the match? Oh, that guy was in the match. Oh, I guess we're doing pretty good then. That was the best. When they went from the 4-on-4 to the 5-on-5, a lot of people thought it was just, oh, you're just adding an extra person, but it changed the dynamic because it was two tag teams getting together to take on two other tag teams, and it went from that to two individuals building teams to go to war, and I think that's really cool. Now, in and around that time, you did have, during the, I would say, the upswing of the brand split before it became ridiculous, you had a separate pay-per-view called Bragging Rights. And if anybody remembers Bragging Rights was one of those things where it was Bragging Rights, but then it was Raw versus SmackDown, but then the Nexus came involved, and then that pay-per-view kind of died. But then they brought the Bragging Rights concept to Survivor Series. And I thought for the longest time, that was a cool concept, right? Because it's like anything else, really. You know, people that watch AEW and WWE want to feel like they're involved in a war between AEW and WWE, even though WWE's clearly better because they don't assault their employees. People that drink Coke and Pepsi still want to have a debate about what's better, Coke or Pepsi. At the time, you could really have a debate, and people still have debates today, and I will side with SmackDown for the most part. I think SmackDown's better than Raw now, and I don't think they're that different, but they are, though. So, yeah, okay, WWE's putting on a WWE show where WWE wrestlers are going to wrestle other WWE wrestlers, and this guy's got a red shirt on, this guy's got a blue shirt on. How silly. Okay, think about any entertainment-based, you know, thing that you get involved in. It's like, oh, there's a football player fighting another football player, but that guy's got my city on his jersey, so I guess I'll side with him. That's all the Survivor Series was for a while. I guess I'll side with them, I guess I'll side with them, because at the end of the day, regardless of what show you were on, if you had a really cool, like, fantasy matchup, and yes, I use that term very loosely, it's still a matter of wrestling fans are just going to side with whoever they like. And then, you know, the best of Raw versus the best of SmackDown. But again, it gave them a free pass booking-wise. And I'm thinking, and yes, I am thinking about it from the WWE perspective as well. You had a cookie-cutter way of doing things, where it was like, okay, we want to put these matches together, which means we have to put these belts on these guys at this time, whatever. And this year, specifically, I think Walter versus, who's the North American champ, or who's the United States champ? It's Seth Rollins now, isn't it? Walter versus Seth Rollins. There's no story there. There's absolutely no story there. Unless you want to go really far back in time and talk about the first NXT champion versus one of the first NXT UK champions, but that's a hard string to pull. But if somebody told me today, hey man, we're not really going to build to it at all, but here's a graphic for Survivor Series, it's Seth Rollins versus Walter, I would watch the fuck out of that. Now, in that case, it would mean the Usos facing themselves and Roman Reigns facing himself, but that's fine, don't worry about it. It would also mean, right now, that it would be Bianca Belair hopefully getting killed by Ronda Rousey. That's fine. I mean, it would the women's tag team titles float, so they would have to fight each other as well. But at the time, it was a visual is visceral. If you guys remember when I used to say that all the time, a champion versus a champion always sells. And when you've got two brands, you've got two sets of champions, you could just do it. It was a cool concept. You got as much. This is going to sound redundant as well. You got as much into the red versus blue war as you wanted to, and it replaced the bragging rights concept. Then they included NXT that one year when people got trapped on the tarmac in Saudi Arabia and NXT had to run SmackDown for a night. Don't worry about it. But where I think they messed that up, because nobody believed at that point. By that point, they had sort of driven the point into the ground. I will admit that. Nobody saw any difference between Raw and SmackDown. They were just seen as main roster WWE. But people still saw a difference between WWE and NXT at that point. People will laugh at it now, and people will say, "Oh, Triple H was, whatever, ego tripping," or whatever the fuck they want to accuse the guy of now. But all the guys from NXT rolling in led by Triple H with the tank and the whole bit and the black and gold shirts and taking over that ring that night was a cool thing, because that was a difference that people saw, because that was a difference that was real, that was a difference people believed in. Where they fucked that up, and they set up a lot of cool triple threat matches, because you could have renamed that, Survivor Series the Triple Threat Edition. They gave NXT all the wins, which was great, but where they lost it in that case was the narrative. The narrative went from Raw versus SmackDown to Raw versus SmackDown with NXT trying to poke its head in the door. Now, what they should have done was given up entirely on the Raw SmackDown thing and just had it be WWE versus NXT. That would have been a simpler story. People wouldn't have thought that their intelligence was being insulted while it was being complimented with the other hand, which is, I think, kind of what happened. But it was an interesting idea in concept, because it wasn't just... At that point, you had taken it from just being a war to a war between two brands to a war between three brands. And it was kind of cool, because anything that's not face-to-face or anything that adds a third element is just different enough. I'll use what's a good example? I'll use the Alien versus Predator example, right? See a bunch of Alien movies, and it's the humans versus the aliens. See a bunch of Predator movies, and it's the humans versus the Predators, which are also aliens. See Alien versus Predator, and it's a perspective of three now. You couldn't just say, well, red's better than blue, blue's better than red, red's better than blue. Is yellow better than both of them? Because then you just get the WWE versus NXT narrative. I think they could have modified that slightly. I still enjoyed that pay-per-view a lot, because that pay-per-view followed on from the War Games match the night before, which was fantastic. So everybody from NXT was carrying the wounds of war, pun intended, into Survivor Series when they already had something to prove just by being there. That was an incredible narrative on their part, whether people want to believe it or not. But now we've come to another version of Survivor Series. And getting back to my initial point, the 4-on-4 matches turned to the 5-on-5 matches, turned into the bragging rights concept, turned into a 3-way bragging rights concept. And now Triple H has the helm, and he says, we're not doing the brand warfare anymore because we acknowledge that the fans don't buy it anymore. That's the big one of the big differences with Papa H. And now we are going to bring back something that people do love in NXT. They did love at TakeOver. We can't really bring a TakeOver level event with the NXT that we have right now, so we'll bring it to the main roster with a lot of the talent on the main roster that made it what it was. Your Rhea Ripley's, your Candice LeRae's, your Kevin Owens's, your etc., etc., etc. And we're going to give you War Games. And we can give you War Games because we have the factions to do it. We could do what's the name? Not Impact, but TNA back in the day when they did Lockdown and they just brought the cage down at the beginning of the night and left it there. You could do faction warfare all night. You really could. You could get Legato in there. You could get Damage Control in there. You could get the Bloodline in there. You could get, I don't know, dip down into NXT and get, Damage Control versus Toxic Attraction. That's something I've been pulling for a long time. You can get the New Day with a couple of extra members. You could get, as I say, Legato with a couple of extra members. You could get I mean, if they were able to get Swerve Scott back from AEW, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not saying poach talent or whatever. I'm just fantasy booking here. Get them and a couple of other people together. You could do faction warfare all night. Remember Survivor Series Gang Rules? I mean, everybody remembers what Survivor Series ended with at that particular pay-per-view, but the whole idea of gang warfare was an actual thing by that point. You weren't just putting two tag teams together. You had the Nation, you had the Disciples of Apocalypse, you had the Bariquas, and no, not all of them were great, let's be real, but we can do that now. Now you've gotten the WWE to the point where people have factions, people have, you know, the Brawling Brutes and the Bloodline is a thing that we're going to see eventually, probably, at War Games. You've got Damage Control, which pissed off enough people on the other side that they have to actually grow as well. That's a naturally formed thing. That's probably what we're going to see at War Games. I don't think you need to do anything with Survivor Series because out of all the pay-per-views, Survivor Series is the one that has changed its identity the most. So again, I'm asking you guys once again, put it down in the box below, find me on Twitter at SpazPhoenix. What do you think of Survivor Series? Are you sick of, when you say, if you are a person that says, oh, I'm sick of the Survivor Series gimmick, which one are you talking about? The 4-on-4 original Survivor Series matches, the 5-on-5s with the captains? Are you talking about when it became bragging rights? Are you talking about when they included NXT and NXT UK? Because I think Kaylee Ray was part of one of those as well. Are you talking about the one that hasn't happened yet with War Games? And War Games as well. And we said this in NXT too, so this is not a new thought. It does present a different platform for the wrestlers for the rest of the night because having two rings is a different thing to look at. It's a different thing to deal with. It looks different. It's something different for the wrestlers to deal with. Like Brock Lesnar driving down a tractor for his last man standing match with Roman Reigns and lifting up one side of the ring was absolutely dumb, was absolutely ridiculous, but you remember that match now because it gave you something different to look at. Why do we sit there and we constantly ask for WWE to do unique stages because the LED screens are boring? Why? Because we remember the SmackDown Fist. We remember the swinging blades for Backlash. We remember when the Money in the Bank ladder match Tron looked like it was set up on two sets of ladders. We remember, as lame as it is, when they would go to WWE, or sorry, when they would go to the UK for Raw and they would put the double-decker bus and the phone box on the stage just because it was something different to look at. Now, you take the mainstream audience that may not necessarily have seen NXT's version of War Games and you put a double ring in front of them, they're going to take a couple minutes just to look at that. That's cool. That's different. They do a lot of playing around with that metal plate that runs between the two rings. Somebody's going to get DDT'd on that because, as we know, in wrestling lore, it's already the hardest part of the ring. Now put a piece of metal on top of it. They have a lot of cool shit to do with this, and I'm sorry, after this year, if you still come at me with the mentality of, you know, oh, I'm just so tired of the Survivor Series gimmick, then I'll know you're full of crap, because, again, which one are you talking about? Now, tell me down in the box below what you think of Survivor Series. What do you think of what it has been? What do you think it should be? Down there, all in the box below. This pod, more than any other pod, is meant for you guys to come back at me with conversation, because I might do a follow-up to this if I get enough good or bad responses. King of the Ring. King and Queen of the Ring now, I should say, because it was announced last week that WWE actually finally filed the official trademark for the term Queen of the Ring. I guess they didn't do that last year in Saudi when they crowned Zelina Vega the Queen's Crown tournament winner in Saudi Arabia, when they also put 6 women in a cage in Saudi Arabia, which isn't that great, but whatever. King and Queen of the Ring. If you're going to do it properly. If you're going to do it, handle all your titles. This is the time, if you're going to do King of the Ring, if you're going to get rid of Hell in the Cell, if you're going to get rid of TLC, if you're going to get rid of Extreme Rules, you're going to get rid of a lot of the gimmick pay-per-views, you're going to have empty slots on your calendar, obviously. So if you're going to do King of the Ring, do it properly. Center the pay-per-view around the tournament itself. This is where a lot of title matches that you would have thrown onto the pay-per-view can be sprinkled out in weeks around the pay-per-view. Do you remember when we locked down? And I hated it at the time. I'm not going to lie. I was fuming in my reviews. Back when I was reviewing good, proper, black and gold rock and roll NXT, when we first shut down for the quarantine, for the pandemic, we did WrestleMania in the empty building, and then we took the card for Stand and Deliver and spread the matches that would have been on that card out over the next couple of weeks of TV. Now, I hated that because of why we had to do it. But in this case, you could do the reverse of that. Whatever women's title match, whatever men's title match, whatever tag team story you have going on, whatever women's tag team story you have going on, whatever new additions you have, whatever, you know, people may be visiting NXT, etc., etc., etc. Put all those matches, all those title matches, all those number one contenders matches, all those battle royals to establish a new number one contender, etc. Have Ronda Rousey defend her title properly, randomly on SmackDown. Bianca Belair defends her title randomly on Raw. Have an episode of SmackDown in Madison Square Garden to justify Roman Reigns actually legitimately putting his title on the line. Have the Usos defend them the same night. Have a super SmackDown or whatever. So everything that you would have done on the pay-per-view this month gets spread out over the ratings of those shows, and the pay-per-view itself can focus just on the tournament itself. Now, what I will say, and I said the same thing about the Royal Rumble, I said the same thing here, because people have kicked this around too, because there's a king and a queen of the ring. I wouldn't mind it being Deadly Games style, where the whole tournament happens in one night. And I will say, don't do both. Either do it with the king and queen of the ring, or do it with the Royal Rumble. If you're going to have a whole pay-per-view in one night, or a whole tournament in one night, have the men's pay-per-view, have the men's tournament on the Saturday, have the women's tournament on the Sunday. That could be awesome. Don't do it if you're also doing that with the Royal Rumble, because then people are going to get exhausted. You can do the whole tournament in one night, or you can do, you know, given time restraints and all that kind of thing, do both tournaments in the same night, have a men's quarterfinal, women's quarterfinal, men's quarterfinal, women's quarterfinal, men's semifinal, women's semifinal, final, and final. You can do that all in one night too. That does make sense as well. One thing I will say, and people will not agree with me on this, this is one of the things, I know the brand split is all but dead anyway, this is one of the things where you can mix the rosters up. This is one of the things where if they're going to take a field, like a proper field of men's and women's wrestlers, take them from all three brands. Try to get NXT into this mix as well. So when you're doing the preliminary matches leading up to the pay-per-view, you might have a SmackDown that features a Raw match between a Raw person and a NXT person, and vice versa, and everything will feel a bit connected just for this little bit of time. That's the first thing. Include all three rosters. Show that you're picking all these men and all these women from everywhere you can in the WWE spectrum. And the other thing, it has to mean something. If you take the tournament seriously, but there's no gold at the end of the rainbow, there's no brass ring to reach up for, sorry Cesaro, you're out of luck, it has to mean something. Do it the month before SummerSlam, and there's your next 3 title chances or whatever. Treat it like Money in the Bank or the Royal Rumble, in the sense that the men's winner can go for a title that he wants, the women's person can go for the title that they want. Make it part of currently existing storylines. If Katana Chance wins the women's Queen of the Ring and she wants to use that to get a tag team title shot for her and Caden Carter and have them featured on SummerSlam because they're the ones that won the Queen of the Ring, do stuff like that. Do stuff like that. If quarantine hadn't happened and the pandemic hadn't happened, Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte Flair for the NXT Championship at WrestleMania would have been a turning point. It wasn't, because everybody was pissed off at life at that point, and, you know, people don't like Charlotte Flair because how dare she be white, blonde, and successful. But somebody on the main roster winning the Royal Rumble and deciding that what they want to do with that chance is go down to NXT, bring that NXT Women's Championship and champion to WrestleMania to take it off them, would have been a huge deal. You can do the same thing with something like this. So, if you're going to do King and Queen of the Ring, first of all, take it seriously. Second of all, use all 3 rosters. Third of all, it has to mean something. If you do King and Queen of the Ring, and it doesn't mean anything other than them getting a goofy crown, Xavier Woods is the exception because he can pull off goofy stuff. Zelina Vega's already doing something better now with Legado del Fantasma. It has to mean something. It absolutely has to mean something. And don't make it a chintzy king or queen gimmick. Be like, fuck off, I won the tournament, I'm coming for you. Shayna Baszler wins Queen of the Ring, Queen of Spades of the Ring, or something like that, turns on her friend and says, yeah, guess what, get ready, you wanted me to be a bad bitch, see you at SummerSlam. Something like that. Have them, have one of those situations where they try to do the corny crowning thing, and the winner just steps on it and is like, no, I would much rather wear a belt than your crown, thank you very much. That would be really cool. The last thing I'm going to say is something I sort of mentioned at the beginning. Apparently TakeOver is coming back. Like the brand TakeOver, which means a couple of things to me. It means you have to hold the show to a higher standard. It means that they're finally going to go out on tour into a proper sized building. And it means that we can just have a standard of what a takeover used to be. And I said it before, and I'm going to take the chance to say it again now. If you want to have a takeover to prove that takeover has come back, then you need to pull all the cheat codes you can. Pull all the best wrestlers you can, because right now look at who's majorly over. Roxanne Perez is majorly over. Make that when she wins the women's championship. Grayson Waller is insanely over. Make that the night that he becomes the North American champion. I don't know who you put up against Braun Breaker, but maybe you bring somebody back. Maybe this is where you pull another Finn Balor type situation, or maybe once Sami Zayn, or if Sami Zayn wants to go to NXT to represent the Bloodline and bring the NXT title to the Bloodline, you do something like that. You go online, you look at who's over, who's not over, build the best card you can, pull every over person on the main roster that has ties to NXT, get them involved in that card for the night, get a huge crowd behind it, and you put it in one or two places. And yes, I'm being a little bit biased when I say this, you put it in the Scotiabank Arena in Toronto, in my backyard, and if you're not going to do that, put it in the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, where TakeOver actually started outside of Full Sail. You put it in one of those two buildings, you give people the stars returning that they want, you give the people the stars you want now that they want, and just take a minute, look back at the old takeovers and say, does this measure up? You got to do it. If you minor thing towards that, something that we after we stopped naming takeovers after places where they were, because they were all happening in the Performance Center for a while, one thing that did come to fruition, I guess you could say, is the concept of TakeOver Stand and Deliver. I like that as a title, I like that as a name, I like that as a focal point of the NXT year. Bring back TakeOver, get everything back to a TakeOver standard first of all, but then establish, I would say either establish or re-establish, depending on how you want to look at it. Establish Stand and Deliver as NXT's WrestleMania. Put it back as part of WrestleMania weekend. I like what they did the one year, actually, where it was, Stand and Deliver was, what did they do? Stand and Deliver was Wednesday and Thursday, SmackDown and the Hall of Fame were Friday, WrestleMania was Saturday and Sunday, and then you had the Raw after WrestleMania. It was so much wrestling to plow through, but you gave us all lots of time in advance. I like the other one that they did too, with the 2.0 Stand and Deliver, that was like midday on Saturday before WrestleMania Night 1. I like those concepts as well. I talked at the beginning of this pod about wrestling fatigue. WrestleMania weekend, or the week leading up into WrestleMania, or even that whole season, is the one time where I kind of want to feel wrestling fatigue. So either do it over the two nights like they did, or make it part of the WrestleMania weekend somehow. You're not going to get it on the Saturday anymore, because two-night WrestleMania is here to stay, I think. But just do all the cool things. Do all the cool things. And because you know whenever WrestleMania comes around, for the main roster anyway, we always say, oh, how come this person wasn't on there? How come that person wasn't on there? Don't solve those problems by throwing them in a battle royal on the kickoff. That's not how we do it. Don't solve those problems by giving those people a match on the quote-unquote SmackDown Mania show. Solve that problem by maybe those guys are the ones that go down and invade NXT for a night, or they want to prove themselves against the younger generation, or play up a story like that. Maybe have a couple of your NXT matches on the main roster, maybe have a couple champion versus champion, whatever you want to do. But bring TakeOver back to a standard. First of all, if you're bringing that brand back, it has to mean something, much like King of the Ring. But also, once you've established what TakeOver is, establish Stand and Deliver as the, and no, I'm not using this as a pun, establish stand and deliver as the crown jewel of the NXT calendar. This is a lot. These are a lot of rumors. This is a lot of just my opinion that I'm throwing at you at the end of the day. Please tell me what you guys think of all of this. And as I say, once again, on all the different things that I've talked about or anything else that you think would either improve the WWE calendar or things that you think are actually fine right now. Because I do think there's a lot of things that are fine right now. Let me know everything you want to talk about as it comes to the topics that I've talked about. Tonight, I'm out of breath, my voice is sore, it's very warm in here for November. I'm going to call it a night. I've been Spaz, your YWC Reality Check. Subscribe up there, talk down there, start a conversation, keep all these conversations going, don't be a stranger. I will talk to each and every last one of you later, but for right now, I am tagging out. Bye, guys.